Everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fresh Fiction's Video Book Club. I'm Samantha T, and I am so excited for our guest author today, Emma Berry. Her new book, Bad Reputation, has just come out. It was actually one of the early fresh picks through Prime with Amazon. I'm about halfway through it. And I also want to touch on some of your other series, Emma, because I've been a fan of those, and I've just got so many different things to ask you. Thanks for joining
I'm
us.
so excited to be here. This is like the first interview I've done since the book came out. And so I'm so excited to talk with somebody about it because I feel like it's been all just like on social media. And so I'm so excited to be here.
Let's get started with something easy. Okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how did you first get started writing? Because I know you have a varied past,
I have a
right?
very fast. That makes me sound more interesting though than I think I am. So I was in graduate school studying popular literature from the 19th century, and I was on maternity leave, and it occurred to me that I had never read a romance novel. And yeah, that felt really weird. I was like, why haven't I read one of those? And I had just gotten a Kindle for Christmas. And so I literally Googled what is the best romance novel? Because if I was going to read one, I wanted to read the best one. And it was the list I found was on All About Romance. And the number one on their poll that year was Lord of Scoundrels by Loretta Chase. So I downloaded that book and I loved it. And it was like, I think I had forgotten how to have fun as a reader and it was great. And so I was like, I should read another one. And then I looked up and it was 6 months later and I'd read 200 romance novels. And I think this is a thing that happens to a lot of us. And then NaNoWriMo was rolling around and I was like, I've been having so much fun reading all these romance novels. I should write one. So I wrote a book and it was terrible. It was like notably horribly bad. And I was so angry that it was bad that made no, it was just like, how could that be? So I started reading about craft. I wrote another book. It was also really bad, I regret to inform you. And so I was like, okay, one more. One more is going to do it. And then I wrote a third book, and then I thought it was pretty good. So then I had this kind of other problem, which is what am I doing? Am I just writing books for myself? And so I ended up submitting it to a contest really just to get sort of an opinion on it. And the next thing I knew, I had a book offer. And so that was how I got started. And that was about 10 years ago. And at this point, I think I'm hooked. I think I'm stuck. And then I don't know how to stop writing books. But yeah, so I teach literature and then I also used to work in the government. And so I've had different fingers in different pots. But at this point, it's really just the teaching and the writing.
I have to admit, I was holding my breath a little bit to hear what was that best book of romance of all time, because there's like such a level of pressure. Like, what if it wasn't a good book? And of course, Lord of Scoundrels, Loretta Chase, awesome. It's a favorite with some of us here in our book club. But it's, oh my gosh, what if it had been something else? And
Yeah, no, I've thought about that too. And I think it's also, I love that book, but I also know people who don't like that book. And like, it's quite possible that whatever I had found, I might not have clicked with in the same way. And then I feel like it's like the road not taken. Maybe I wouldn't be doing this and that would be okay. I don't think that's like some loss to the world or anything, but it definitely, it's a branching moment where I think if I hadn't clicked with that book in the same way, I think a lot of things would be different about my life for sure.
and of course, with that being one of the classic historical novels, did you then also branch out to other types of genres within romance? Because you're not writing a lot of historical now.
That is true. It took me about 6 months. I really imprinted on that book very strongly. And so for a while, it was like only historical could scratch the itch. But then I tapped out on the writers that I was really excited about. And then I branched out into contemporary. And it was when I switched from writing, as the first book I wrote with contemporary, then I wrote a historical, and then I went back to contemporary. And that's when it felt like my voice clicked and where it was like, okay, this is the kind of story I want to tell. And this is what it sounds like when I'm telling a story that feels authentic to me. And so I have written some historical, but mostly I have written contemporary.
See, now that's a great transition to talk about one of the series of yours that I just enjoy, The Fly Me to the Moon. Don't
Yeah.
like a couple weeks ago in book club as to what counts as historical and what is that time period. Technically, yeah, the 1960s, the start of the space race would be historical. To me, it's borderline contemporary because it's more the modern age.
Yeah.
What about for you straddling that? And what was the inspiration behind that series? I love the astronauts, the engineer. I'm an engineer, so it was just,
Yeah.
I loved all of that and just the fun aspects of the 1960s that you were also able to incorporate?
I love those books so much. And to this day, those are the books I hear from readers the most about. And so this is a series that I co-wrote with my critique partner, Genevieve Turner, one of my very good friends. And so I think Jen and I think of them as being historical. I do know that for some readers, that feels like, no, how could that be historical? And I totally get that. But for us, I think the reason it feels historical is that we specifically decided we wanted to write a space series set in a time where the technology was really different from now. And so it was like, not now was so key to the way we conceived of them. And so I would say for us, that made it feel historical. I think for someone else, they might think about that line in a kind of different, in a different way. I was essentially really thinking about series that I loved and how the characters would be grouped together. Like you might have a series in a family and you have what sibling A falls in love and then sibling B. Or you might have like members of a sports team. And so we watch this person fall in love and then the next person on the team and so on. And so I was literally making lists of like groups of people who you could write a romance series about, but where I hadn't seen a romance series set in that particular milieu or whatever. And I wrote down astronaut, and then I like went to write the next thing, and I was like, wait, that's it. Like that's the idea. And so I really liked the idea of this astronaut thing. And so I was talking to Genevieve about it, and she was like, yes, that has to be your next project. And then as she and I were chatting about it, she's a scientist and I'm not a scientist. And so I was like, wait, we should write them together because you'll bring like the sciencey side, because it was really important to me to get like those details right and for it to be like grounded in the science and the technology in a way that felt realistic, even though obviously like we made up our own NASA. It's not realistic in that way. But so then she agreed and then we wrote those books and it was, I mean, such a great writing experience. And I wish we'd found more readers. I think we'd have more success now. I think if they were coming out today, we might find more readers than we did because I think there's more of those kind of recent historicals. I don't know what to call them, but like the mid-century historical.
And the thing with those that also resonated with me, I was saying it's because I'm an engineer, I'm
Mhm.
always looking for those STEM-based books
Yeah.
or where the characters are not the typical romance type careers, right? I mean, you
Mhm.
have a lot of secretaries, you have a lot of business owners. You don't usually have a lot of engineers, right? That's okay.
Sure.
But that's where I was enjoying those and also transitioning then into Bad Reputations, where again, you are looking at for one of the characters an unusual career field that she stumbled into. And we were talking before this of what exactly is an intimacy coordinator. And a lot of people, I'm surprised, have not really been familiar with that. And I know it's really picked up, especially over the last 5 or 6 years with the Me Too movement and that they were around before. So what pulled that out of you of, hey, here is another unusual career that I can build a story around for one of my characters?
Yeah. My so much of my own life has been about me feeling consternation about whether or not I'm in the right job and whether or not I'm in the right field. And so I think in some way, my core story is like someone is having a work crisis and falling in love at the same time. And I keep telling some version of that story over and over again. I don't mean to. And then I do it again. Like it's really obnoxious. And so Bad Reputation started almost 10 years ago. I actually wrote the first draft in 2015, 2016. And the first draft of that book was actually set at a film festival. So Cole was actually a very similar character in the first draft to in the final version. This actor who got started on this soapy teen drama and has never really been able to distance himself from this character that people first met him as. And in the first version of the book, Maggie was a hardware store owner and an amateur photographer, and she was assigned to like take him around the film festival. He was like leading the audience jury, and she was like, oh, because she thought he was this himbo character that she had assumed, and then realizing he wasn't, and then falling in love. I loved the book. It never really worked. And it was just sitting on my hard drive. And I just thought it was a dead end project, which happens sometimes, right? You write a book and it just, for whatever reason, doesn't click. And I'd written some books for my current publisher and we were talking about option material. And I mentioned this because wouldn't it be lovely if they would buy this book that I'd already written? And my editor was like, I like the idea of the himbo actor, but what if it was on set? So what if rather than being a film festival, it was about filming? And that was interesting. And so then we were batting ideas around, and the idea of a Bridgerton-esque show came up. And then I was like, what if she's the intimacy coordinator? And we were like, boom, that's the idea. And I knew very little about it other than the kind of general sense of this is a job and it's a new thing. It has been around in theater for a long time, which makes sense because if there's nudity in a play, it's live in front of an audience. And you can understand where in the theater that would be something that people would be concerned about. It's newer in movies and in TV. And so I started reading every interview I could find with intimacy coordinators and finding CVs online. And I was really interested in the background of intimacy coordinators because since it is a newer field, you can't go to school to become one. And many of them were dancers, actually. That's a very common background. And that sort of makes sense when you think about bodies and choreography. And so it just branched out from there. But then she turned into a very Emma-esque character where she's having this work crisis of remaking herself. And this is the way that she is doing that. That was a very long answer to your question. I apologize.
No, but it's interesting to see how the story evolved because she's an intimacy coordinator now, and knowing that that was totally not what it started out with. But you've even evolved that role more than the surface elements of just how are you coordinating a sex scene. It is, and I don't think this is giving things away in the story, but there's another level of the intimacy between the characters and that line of, okay, how are you bringing the scene together? There's just so many different aspects of this book beyond even just the love story that I've been pulled in on. And oh, wow, okay. And just where you're giggling on certain things and you're like, oh, and I want to hear more about some of these other secondary characters. But
Yeah.
the other aspect with this is the fact that you have older characters. At this point, they are in their late 30s, early 40s. Was that also something that evolved as the story changed, or was that just happenstance, or was that a determined focus? Because again, because I'm of that age, a little past that. So I'm enjoying finding books where they are the older characters. And I think that kind of plays into the crisis that each of these characters are going through.
Yeah, that was always built in because I'm in my early 40s. And I feel like that moment in the late 90s and the early 2000s where you had like peak tabloids was really toxic. There's a lot of things that are toxic about celebrity culture now. So I don't want to be like, it was so much worse, but I was really interested in that particular moment and what it would be like to be coming up as a star when every week at the grocery store you have the cover of Us Weekly thinking about whatever somebody's recent screw up is. And so the idea that Cole had gotten started in that moment and has never been able to wash off that toxicity and the shadow that's cast over his life, he just felt like that age to be, and that was the right kind of vintage for him, if that makes any sense. And then I wanted Maggie to have had, because she was a school teacher, high school drama teacher before getting into the Hollywood stuff. And I wanted her to have had an established career as a teacher. And if she was 25 or something, and then the same set of events had occurred, I don't think it might have been the same sense of loss as if she's had a 15-year career as a teacher and then just kind of she gets fired for directing a controversial play. And I feel like that would be more of a threat to her identity if that's really been something she's been doing for a long time. So it really came out of is really holistic and just thinking about the themes I wanted to play around with and then just building it in. And then that was sort of the age they were.
And that's what I liked because it just felt so natural as to what was going on with the characters and the story. Even though they're older characters, you're not getting beaten over the head of, oh my gosh, these people are ancient or anything like that. It just was like, oh, of course, this just makes sense because of their history. And this just happens to be where they are in life. And with all of that, too, again, some of the details that you've put into the story, I read in one of your other posts, that's the background. One of the things that you're always trying to pull into your stories is, and I love the quote, love is in the details. And so how much fun do you have in putting those different details into your story? And especially with this one, because it is more of a slow burn.
Very slow burn. So I will say I've also heard from readers who were like, when it got hot, it got really hot. So it does pay off, but it is a very slow burn. I personally love that stuff and I love the research. And I think it is my background as an academic and I can get a little carried away with the research. And then you're like, but I learned it all. I have to put it in the book, right? It's trying to get that balance between the research that I've done and then not wanting it to overload the story, but wanting it to inform the story is tricky. And I hope I walk that line well. And I think that'll probably depend on the readers, but I love all that stuff. And to me, it helps make the story feel grounded in reality. And that's definitely the goal.
And how is that balance then of your day job where you're teaching literature and then writing romance? And we were talking about
Mhm.
this with Eloisa James recently because in her day job, right, she is a professor and she's teaching Shakespeare, and various people can look at that difference of, oh, yes, I'm literature and I'm teaching all these very important things. And there is still this element where people look down on romance.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you balance those two different efforts?
Yeah. I think popular literature does so many cool things that literature, like capital L literature with two T's and a trademark on the end of it. I think they have so many of the same aims. I think there is a sense, like an understanding of the market that may go into commercial fiction that maybe like my colleagues who write literary fiction are not as worried about the market or that's not essential to the concern. But even then, I know poets who, when they write a poem, are thinking, is this a poem I'm going to send to the New Yorker? Is this the poem I'm going to send to the Swanee Literary Review? So I think there are notions of market. They maybe aren't attached to money in the way that like commercial fiction is, but I think a lot of it's the same. So I would say early in grad school, those things felt very different to me. But now they really don't feel very different to me. And I love that at my day job, we might be talking about covers, or we might be talking about marketing, or we might be talking about titles. And then I get to come home and think about those things. I don't want to say for real because what happens in my classroom is real too, but I get to think about those things and then we get to pick a cover for a book and then it goes out into the world. And in some ways, it feels like the difference between science and engineering. And in the classroom, I do the science stuff. And then my author career is engineering, where we actually put it into practice. And so then it's not just theoretical. It's okay, let's pick that cover. Let's see how that cover does in the market. It's not just this kind of conversation that we're having. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. Let's find out. And so they don't feel like two sides of a coin to me. They feel like connected.
Do you feel sometimes those two worlds bleed into each other then?
In the spring, I'm teaching an intro to literature class on romance novels. And yeah, I'm super excited. I've taught upper division classes on romance novels before, but this is the first time that I'm teaching it at the intro level. And so, yes, I do think that they do bleed into each other. And I also have moments where I'll be reading a literary short story for class and I'll notice something a writer does. And I'm like, and I think about it in a different way from a craft perspective as a writer than the way that I would think about it just as a literature professor or just as a reader of literature. And I'll be like, man, that's so cool. I have to try that. And so I do think that writing fiction has made me a better reader of fiction, even though I spent a lifetime learning how to be a reader of fiction. I still think there's things that I've learned from doing it that I never would have learned if I'd never written a novel.
I'm going to save my follow-up question on that because I want to jump into our fresh fiction facts, which are meant to be a series of rapid fire questions off the top of your head. And I'm going to start off with something that's not my normal one. So based on what
Okay.
you're saying, what is something then that instantly pulls you out of a story?
Yeah. So one thing out of a story is when I'm not sure how they're going to solve the problem. I'll give you an example. When I was reading Susanna Kearsley's The Winter Sea for the first time, which is one of my all-time favorite books, totally amazing. It's kind of women's fiction with strong romantic elements. But in the bleak moment, something happens, and I won't spoil it, but something happens that's so bleak that I was like, can she actually give me an HEA? And that totally pulled me out of the story. And she does, by the way, total HEA. But I was so concerned that she had written herself in a corner, I almost couldn't finish the book.
Wow. For me, it's almost the opposite. When I hit something like that, I'm pulled in even more.
Mhm.
Because it's like, where did that come from? Okay, what are they going to do? And for romance, I'm like, okay, there's going to be a happily ever after. I've got to have that HEA, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm even more intrigued to see
Interesting.
what that is. Let's see. Who would you most want to be stuck in an elevator with?
Emma Thompson.
Oh my gosh, she would be fabulous. I love Emma Thompson.
She's so good. It would be like the wittiest, like 2 hours while you're waiting for the fireman.
God, yes. And of course, they'd have to be like fantastic firemen to then come rescue to put the cherry on top with everything. It's like,
Yeah,
okay.
totally.
How do you unwind after a good or a bad writing day?
That's a really hard one. I think unwinding after a good writing day can be hard because you're buzzing. And like, I often will want to keep writing. And sometimes I have to stop myself while there are still ideas rather than writing to the end of my ideas. And so there, sometimes it's okay, that was good enough. And now you know where you're going. And that's going to set you up for tomorrow. I take a lot of long walks with my dog. Hopefully, he's not going to bark here in a second. He's supposed to be corralled upstairs, but a lot of long walks with the dog. And that sort of helps me get even. It can be tough if it's been a bad writing day because you want to end on something that is good, right? You want to end so that it doesn't feel hopeless. So sometimes I'll just try and write like one good sentence and then be like, okay, one good sentence is what we did today. And then that's it.
That makes sense. Yeah. Would you rather go back in time to meet your ancestors or go forward and meet your descendants?
That's a really good one. I think go back in time, and I guess that's like the historian in me, but I think seeing the future would be really paralyzing once you return to the present, so I guess I'd rather go back to the past.
Course, then the follow up is when in the past would you most want to go back to? What era?
Many. I have to admit that I am so deeply intrigued by that mid-century moment, which is why we wrote this book. And specifically, I'm really intrigued by early 70s DC. And so I think that might be my choice.
That makes sense. Also, I would assume because of your political background, and there was
Yeah.
so much going on that time period in DC. It's okay.
Wouldn't you want to go to the Watergate hearings? I would like the Watergate hearing.
I see that.
I mean, nothing if not predictable.
But other than books, what is something that you own a ridiculous amount of?
I own a ridiculous amount of cardigans. And the funny thing is, I just realized there's one on my chair and I took one off right before I started this interview because I was like, I'm a little warm. And so there are currently 2 cardigans in my office, and we won't even talk about how many there are in my closet.
Cardigan, always classic.
Yes.
You can pull those out for anything. So that's a
Yeah.
favorite one. Okay, what is one thing that was ruined once it became super popular?
Oh, that's a really good one. Kombucha. I think it was better 5 years ago, and I think it's gotten too sweet now. Such a dorky answer. I'm sorry.
We appreciate the range. Don't worry. What is one thing that you always forget when you're in a super hurry?
I frequently forget to take my phone with me when I leave the house, and most of the time it's fine, and sometimes it's good to remember that we used to live without phones all the time, but I need it for two-factor sign-in on a bunch of things, and so when I don't have it, it's a huge pain. But yeah, I feel like I forget my phone very frequently.
What is your favorite snack to pick up for a road trip?
It is wasabi almonds.
Ooh. Who was your favorite comedian when you were growing up?
Oh, man. So when I was growing up, I was really obsessed with SNL, and I actually wrote an SNL romance. And so I would say I was a big fan of Molly Shannon on SNL in the 90s.
What was your favorite children's TV show when you were growing up?
Favorite children's TV show? I was a huge fan of the Megan Follows Anne of Green Gables, but I guess does that count? Okay. Because that wasn't a show, that was like a movie, but it was always on PBS, so I feel like it's a TV show.
And it's got to be that version.
Yes.
Yes.
I've heard Anne with an E is good on Netflix, but I can't bring myself to watch it because I think I just gave my whole heart away to the 80s one. And I'm not sure there's room in my heart for two Annes.
Yeah. And for me, Anne Gilbert.
Yes. And their chemistry is so good in that one. It's so good.
Okay. What is your most dog-eared or reread book? The one you just keep going back to?
I'm a rereader. And so there's many books that I have read many times. The one I read the most is probably Pride and Prejudice, which is a deeply cliche answer, I'm sure, but it is true.
So I'm curious then. Okay, so if that's your most reread, do you consider that to be in your romances that you read after you discovered romance, or was that more of a literary classic that you read before?
I'd read it before. And I would say the thing that always reminds me, I reread it every year at Christmas. I don't know why, but I do. It's not a Christmas book. I'm not sure why that's a habit of mine. But every time I reread it, I am shocked at how little time Elizabeth and Darcy spend together on the page. Because when you watch the adaptations, they obviously focus very much on those moments. But he's almost never in that book. And so I think it reads more like a comedy of manners with strong romantic elements than a romance per se. If only because at least that romance, I guess there's multiple romances in the book, but I feel like that one is secondary, though they both have arcs. And that is often my line between romance and not romance is do both love interests or all the love interests, do they all have interior arcs? And certainly Darcy does have an arc. He's not just this perfect unattainable love interest. He goes through stuff to be worthy of her also. And I could see where people would make the argument that it is a romance. But I guess to me, tonally, because it's so ironic, and I would say that seems to place it a little bit more in comedy of manners for me.
Since you're rereading that book each year, do you also go back and rewatch the different film adaptations? And with that, then, of course, which is your favorite?
So I refuse to choose. I do end up rewatching them very frequently. I love both 95 and 2005 for different reasons. I know that a lot of people have very strong feelings about one or the other. I just feel like they're different things. 95, I think, is more accurate to the tone. I also appreciate that it has time, 'cause it's at 5.5, 6 hours long, to do all the storylines and you don't have any cuts. The 2005, while not accurate to the tone, certainly I fully accept that critique, is still very, very romantic. And I play the piano and I love the piano music in that one. And so I love them both in different ways.
Okay, I'm going to say you also need to check out Bride and Prejudice then. It's like a Bollywood take.
It's great. I know I've seen Bride and Prejudice. I think it's awesome. And I've heard amazing things about Fire Island, but we just don't have Hulu at the moment. So I haven't watched it. But that's supposed to be really good too.
Okay, along with the films, what is the most terrible movie that you legitimately enjoy?
It's Evolution. And have you seen this movie?
I have seen it multiple times. Yes.
Oh, it's so bad and it's so fun. And if people have not seen this movie, it's David Duchovny and it's totally ridiculous and it's great. And you just have to, yeah. So yeah, get just a little drunk and watch that movie and it's fantastic. But if you're sober, you're just like, the science makes no sense. It makes no sense.
But it doesn't even matter at that point. There's just so many funny lines and especially as it gets further into the movie, and I'm now running different things in my head, and which I'm not going to put on recording now. But yeah,
It's hilarious. And I legitimately want to know how they got Julianne Moore for that movie. And there's a romance in that movie. But that was something Julianne Moore at the height of her 90s prestige dramas. She was doing Boogie Nights and Evolution. And I would give anything to know how that happened. Call me, Julianne. I want to know.
what is a skill that you wish you had learned but never did, or at least haven't yet?
I would love to be fluent in a foreign language. It's just I don't have felicity with them. Just can't seem to pick them up very well. I have been working on French for what feels like half my life, and I speak almost no French. It's really aggravating.
I've been doing Duolingo, and it's the challenge of having to take that lesson every single day. And then I get in a rut because I don't want to lose my streak.
Yeah.
Same lesson over and over again.
Yeah.
I get the learning it for the end half your life, and heaven forbid if I had to have a conversation. Just
Oh no, it makes me feel foolish. But yeah, no, I would love to be fluent in a foreign language.
okay, Emma. One of the most important questions: what are you working on next? That's what readers always want to know.
Yes. I'm finishing up edits on a book which will be out in May. You know that the meme inside you are two wolves? So inside me are two wolves. And one of those stories is about really nice people just trying to do the right thing and falling in love. And Bad Reputation is wolf number one. And then wolf number two is like deeply messed up people who can't stay away from each other. And so if you read Earthbound, like that's like door number two. So this book I have coming out in May is door number two. It's totally different from Bad Reputation. It's called Bold Moves. And it's in the same world as Bad Reputation. So our male main character is a showrunner on the same not Netflix Videon. And he's had this unexpected hit. And so they've given him basically an unlimited budget. And it's like any project you want. And the project he wants is his ex's memoir. And so he convinces her to give him the rights. And she's like the bad girl of the chess world. And so she's written this memoir about playing chess, but she gives them the rights on the condition that they write the show together. So the first part of the book is these two people who just destroyed each other when they were teenagers, 15 years later, working on the show together and then working through their issues. And I will not say much more than that, but there's a bunch of like secrets. It's very angsty. It is not a slow burn. It is just different from Bad Reputation in all of the ways. And it's just really messy and I love it. And I'm so excited, even though it couldn't be more different.
And with that, where is the best place for our readers and listeners to keep up with you and find out exactly when that new book is coming out?
So I'm on the web at authoremmaberry.com. And then there's links from there to my other socials. I'm on Instagram, probably the most. Please follow, ping me, send me an email, all that jazz. I'd love to hear from you.
Emma, thanks for joining us this evening. Stick around for the happy hour with our readers. And I want to encourage everyone to go out, check out the latest release, Bad Reputation, and also check out her other series because they are awesome. Fly Me to the Moon, The Political Persuasions, and her other standalones. Thanks again, Emma.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.